I am sorry that my acts of self-defense ended up in court like this.
In the realm of life's most solemn moments, the desires of a dying individual hold a weighty significance. But what happens when these wishes emerge from the confines of a prison cell?
At this moment, John Henry Ramirez is in his cell, probably with a spiritual counsel and his attorney,
where the specter of impending execution looms.
I'm not the person they try to portray me to be, you know what I mean? I'm just like anyone else. I just messed up bad, you know what I mean?
Join us as we explore the minds of these criminals and what they asked the last time before their final breath. William George Bonin. William George Bonin, who was nicknamed Freeway Killer, did some truly horrific stuff. He kidnapped, sexually abused, robbed, and murdered 14 teenage boys. He had some other guys who helped him out. Guys who were between 17 and 21 years old. In 1982, he was sentenced to death for 10 of the murders he committed in Los Angeles County. Then, a year later, he got another death sentence for the other 4 murders he committed in Orange County. But wait, there's more. Bonin was also suspected of killing other guys around the same time in Kern, Riverside, San Diego, and San Bernardino counties. However, Bonin was never charged for those crimes. Now let's give you a rundown of what happened in each county where he got the death sentence. On August 5, 1979, Bonin and his gang attacked Marcus Grabs, a 17-year-old German student in Newport Beach. They did some awful things to him and stabbed him 77 times. They left his body near a road in Malibu with an orange cord around his head and wire around his ankle. Then, on August 27, in 1979, Bonin and his buddy Butts picked up a 15-year-old named Donald Hayden in Los Angeles. They killed him, strangled him with a ligature, and stabbed him. They even tried to cut off his private parts and slash his throat. On September 9th of the same year, Bonin and Butts abducted a 17-year-old named David Murillo as he was biking to the movies. They left his naked body on a Ventura Highway off-ramp 3 days later. They bashed his head in, sodomized him, and strangled him with a ligature. Then, on February 3rd, 1980, Bonin was driving a van with another guy named Miley. They picked up a 15-year-old named Charles Miranda and did horrible things to him. They wrapped Charles' shirt around his neck, twisted it with a jack handle until he died, and even put something in his anus. They dumped his body in an alley in downtown Los Angeles. After that, they met a 12-year-old named James McCabe. They invited him into the van, had sex with him, and then beat him, strangled him, and crushed his neck with a jack handle. They left his body next to a dumpster in Walnut. There were more victims in Los Angeles County, like Ronald Gatlin, who was 19, and Harry Todd Turner, who was 14. They suffered the same fate: beating, sodomizing, and strangling. In Orange County, Bonin picked up a 16-year-old named Stephen Wood and defiled him. They left his body in an alley near the Pacific Coast Highway and Long Beach Freeway. Bonin was finally executed on February 23, 1996, by lethal injection in San Quentin State Prison. On his last day, he spent time with friends and had a final meal of 2 big pepperoni and sausage pizzas, 3 pints of coffee ice cream, and 3 six-packs of regular Coca-Cola. Before his execution, he said something to the warden. He believed the death penalty wasn't the answer, and that it sent the wrong message to young people. He suggested that anyone thinking of doing something serious against the law should go to a quiet place and seriously think about it. John Henry Ramirez. As the deadly lethal injection flowed through John Henry Ramirez's veins on that gloomy Wednesday night, Pastor Dana Moore placed his hands on the chest of the Texas death row inmate. His prayer was so warming and filled the air as Ramirez was executed in Huntsville in a small room known as the Death Chamber. That marked the end of a murder case from 2004 that garnered national attention. Ramirez was convicted in 2004 for the murder then 38-year-old Castro in Corpus Christi, Texas. He was only 20 years old when he brutally stabbed the convenience store clerk 29 times, leaving him to die in a parking lot while he fled with $1.2. Ramirez managed to evade arrest by escaping to Mexico until he was captured in 2008 and subsequently sentenced to death. On March 2021, the Supreme Court ruled that Ramirez's pastor could touch him and pray during the execution. Ramirez, who claimed to have undergone a spiritual transformation while on death row, had requested that Moore feel my heart and feel when I transition, as he had told the Washington Post in 2021. On Wednesday, October 2022, Ramirez's request was granted. Just before his death at 6:41 p.m., Ramirez expressed appreciation to the family of Pablo Castro, the father of 9 whom he had fatally stabbed almost 2 decades ago, for their attempts to communicate with him. According to the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, Ramirez said, "I tried to reply back, but there is nothing that I could have said or done that would have helped you." During his time on death row, Ramirez met Moore and other members of the Second Baptist Church. Despite being a Messianic Jew, Ramirez became a member of the church, as reported by the Post. Ramirez's execution had initially been scheduled for September 8, 2021. He had requested that Moore be present to pray and lay his hands on him. However, Texas officials stated that although Moore could be present during the execution, he would not be allowed to touch the inmate. On the night of his planned execution in 2021, as Ramirez waited in a holding room, the justices halted the procedure. Writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Roberts Jr. stated that Ramirez's religious rights were protected by federal law. Roberts added that Texas should be able to accommodate the inmate's request, emphasizing that allowing the spiritual advisor to stand closer and touch a part of the prisoner's body away from the IV line would not significantly increase the risk. Justice Clarence Thomas was the sole dissenter, suggesting that Ramirez was attempting to delay his execution. Castro's family agreed with Thomas, expressing in an amicus brief to the court that Pablo Castro's children and victims of violent crime across the nation deserve better. After the court ruled in favor of Ramirez, a new execution date was set for October 5, 2022. However, an employee in the office of Nueces County District Attorney Mark Gonzalez mistakenly filed a request for a new execution date without consulting Gonzalez, who opposes the death penalty. 2 days later, Gonzalez submitted a request to withdraw the death warrant. In an unprecedented move, a judge denied the motion, as Ramirez's attorney Seth Kretzer informed the Post. In a final attempt, Gonzalez and Kretzer filed a motion last week to withdraw the warrant, but it was denied. On Wednesday morning, Ramirez was transported from the Polunsky unit in Livingston to the Huntsville unit, a 44-mile journey. Upon arrival, he remained in a holding cell until 6 p.m., when he was led to the execution chamber, according to Texas Department of Criminal Justice spokesman Robert Hurst. 11 witnesses, 5 representing the victim and 6 supporting Ramirez, observed through a window as the inmate took his final breaths, Hurst stated. Castro's son, Aaron, read a Bible verse that asked, "Who is a God like you, who pardons sin and forgives the transgression of the remnant of his inheritance?" Castro expressed in his victim statement, "Peace and love and justice for Pablo G. Castro. May his name not be forgotten, and may God have mercy on John Henry Ramirez, for it is not up to us. He is receiving his true judgment from our Lord and Savior. A life taken away is not something to celebrate, but closure can certainly take place." Inside the death chamber, Ramirez expressed remorse for his heinous act and hoped that his death would bring some comfort to Castro's family. His final words were, "Just know that I fought a good fight and I'm ready to go. I am ready, Warden." Moore's hands remained on Ramirez's chest until the inmate was declared dead, according to officials. Jean Hathorn. This guy wiped his entire family from the surface of the earth. The tragic incident that happened in the year 1984 is such that humanity never prays to witness it again. It was a story that twisted and turned, delving into the darkest corners of human behavior, with Jean Hathorn as the daredevil. An evil tale filled with family violence, murder, deceit, and an unexpected final request that would send shivers down your spine. Jean Hathorn, driven by a sinister plan, conspired alongside his accomplice James Lee James Bethard to eliminate members of his own family. But what was their motive? A substantial $150,000 property settlement. Little did they know that their scheme would unravel in unimaginable ways and send them to their early graves. Their victims were none other than Hathorn's own father, Gene Sr., his wife Linda, and their innocent teenage son, Marcus. The murderers believed that by eliminating them, they would clear the path to their desired inheritance. But fate had a wicked twist in store for them. Unknown to them, Jean Sr. had changed his will, cutting G out of the picture entirely. In a desperate attempt to deflect suspicion, Jean Hathorn cunningly scattered African-American human hairs and left cigarette butts near the crime scene. It was a calculated effort to mislead investigators, but their dark secrets couldn't remain hidden forever. The truth slowly unraveled, revealing Hathorn's involvement in the heinous acts that had shattered his own family. The trial that followed was a gripping courtroom drama, with Hathorn desperately pointing fingers at his accomplice, James Lee Beathard. He claimed that Beathard alone was responsible for the brutal killings, while he himself had only fired a single shot through a window. Beathard, in a separate trial, maintained his innocence until the end, facing his own fate. But Hathorn, defiant and unyielding, continued to proclaim his innocence. His legal team argued that the abuse he had endured from his father had fueled his deep-seated hatred for his family, placing the blame squarely on the shoulders of his tormentor. The case took on a new dimension, exploring the complex dynamics of family violence and the far-reaching consequences it can have. However, what set Hathorn's case apart was his bizarre and bone-chilling final request. As the possibility of execution loomed over him and he was sure he couldn't make it any longer, he made a haunting plea. He requested that his body be turned into fish food and fed to goldfish as part of a macabre art installation. Never before has an inmate asked for his body to be turned into fish food and fed to goldfish, all in the name of art. But that is exactly what Jean Hathorn, a convicted murderer on death row in Texas, has pledged to do if his final appeal fails. The artist Marco Evaristi was enlisted to carry out this twisted plan, freezing Hathorn's body and transforming it into a grotesque feast for unsuspecting goldfish. Yet, fate intervened once again. Hathorn's appeal succeeded, and his sentence was changed to 3 life terms of imprisonment. His grotesque request faded into the annals of darkness, never to be realized unless fate casts another dark shadow, but we believe that even the skillful artist would not want to grant such a request. Thomas Douglas Arthur. Douglas Arthur, also known as Tommy, was the scapegoat over a very long and tangled legal saga that ended with his execution. His story is filled with pain, as it revolves around allegations of a contract killing and his unwavering claim of innocence. Let's delve into the key elements of his case. Thomas Arthur's legal journey began with his conviction for the 1902 murder of Troy Wicker in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. The case took a sinister turn when it came to light that Judy Wicker, Troy's wife, had accused Arthur of carrying out the murder. She claimed to have paid him $10,000 to kill her husband due to an extramarital affair. Adding to the complexity of Arthur's criminal history was his previous conviction in 1917 for the murder of his sister-in-law in Marion County. Arthur openly admitted to this crime but vehemently denied any involvement in Troy Wicker's death. His attorney suggested that Judy Wicker had falsely accused Arthur in an attempt to avoid the death penalty and secure the possibility of parole. Thomas Arthur's legal journey was filled with twists and turns. His initial conviction for Troy Wicker's murder was overturned, as was a subsequent conviction. However, in 1991, Arthur was convicted for the 3rd time, and this conviction stood. Throughout the years, he steadfastly maintained his innocence despite the weight of evidence against him. What makes Arthur's case particularly painful is the number of times he faced scheduled executions only to have them stayed at the last moment. He seemed like a legal Houdini, narrowly escaping the ultimate punishment time and time again. As the final execution date approached in May 2017, Thomas Douglas Arthur shocked the criminal justice system with a request. He accepted his impending fate, but asked not to be executed by lethal injection. Citing a debilitating back injury that would intensify his suffering, he argued that lethal injection would be more painful. Instead, he made an unconventional plea to be executed by firing squad, believing it would cause less agony given his physical condition. That's one of the crazy, most disturbing last wishes of death row inmates that the court witnessed. However, The court did not approve this disturbing request. In May 26, 2017, at the age of 75, Thomas Douglas Arthur was executed by lethal injection in Alabama, bringing an end to a legal saga that had spanned over 3 decades. His case stands as a haunting example of the complexities and controversies surrounding the death penalty in the United States. From multiple convictions to last-minute appeals and a final request that challenged conventional execution methods, it remains a painful chapter in the history of criminal justice. Frank Atwood. His deformity was no exception to consider him for survival. The somber and haunting story of Frank Atwood's execution unfolds with a mix of chilling details and emotional moments. At 66 years old, Atwood met his fate through lethal injection for the murder of 8-year-old Vicki Lynn Hoskinson, a crime that shocked Tucson, Arizona in the year 1984 and left a lingering sense of grief and loss. Vicki Lynn had vanished while riding her bicycle to mail a birthday card to her aunt. The community was gripped with fear and sorrow until her body was discovered 7 months later in the desolate expanse of the Arizona desert. The heinous act was so unbearable for Vicki Lynn's loved ones. As the day of Atwood's execution approached, he sat down for his final meal, a moment that would be seared into the memories of those involved. In a peculiar choice, he took some peanut butter and salami, accompanied by mustard, wheat bread, and tortilla chips. It was a choice meal that defied understanding, leaving observers to wonder about the reason for making the selection at such a critical point in his life. Atwood had initially refused a final meal, claiming to be fasting, but ultimately succumbed to the unconventional combination. Moments before his death on June 8, 2022, Atwood's words resonated in the solemn chamber. He thanked the priest for providing spiritual guidance, acknowledging the role of faith in his final moments. His plea to God for mercy echoed throughout the room, a plea that carried with it a profound sense of desperation and the weight of his actions. The execution commenced at 4 minutes past 10 a.m., a solemn and chilling moment that would mark the end of Atwood's life. According to prison officials, he appeared to accept his fate, neither apologizing for his crime nor expressing remorse in his last words. The lethal injection flowed through his veins, and 12 minutes later, Atwood was pronounced dead. Outside the prison walls, friends and neighbors of the Hoskinson family gathered, offering their support and solace. For them, the execution symbolized a step towards closure, a way to honor Vicki Lynn's memory and find some semblance of peace. Throughout his legal battles, Atwood had staunchly maintained his innocence, and his lawyers had made numerous unsuccessful attempts to halt his execution. Despite his degenerative spinal condition, which had left him confined to a wheelchair, Atwood's arguments against the constitutionality of the death penalty procedures were ultimately overruled by U.S. District Judge Michael Labourdi. Subscribers pick. Lost in the pixels of this emotional photo that marked the last days of Mark. Mark sits on the execution chair, his face filled with anguish and desperation, wishing he could rewrite the hand of time. Standing before him is his beloved wife. Her expression was a mix of sorrow and empathy as well. She never knew a day like this could beckon on her. As the execution chair looms, what could Mark possibly be revealing to her in his last moments? Well, he said something so mind-blowing, but to him, it's a dream come true, even as he gently relaxes his body waiting for his last breath. Mark is not the only dying inmate to make his last wish. You'll find out more about the most disturbing last wishes of death row inmates. But please, we want to know what you think about their painful requests. Share your thoughts in the comments section. James Edward Smith. James Edward Smith, a name that would forever be etched in the annals of crime and punishment shaking the prison bars. He was a man condemned for his heinous act of capital murder in the heart of Texas. But it wasn't just the severity of his crime that captured attention. It was his strange and unsettling last meal request that sent shockwaves through the corridors of justice. Smith, a man shrouded in darkness, asked for something that defied comprehension: a lump of dirt. The events unfolded on a fateful day, March 7, 1983, when Smith boldly walked into the Union National Life Insurance Company in Houston. Concealed behind a chilling stocking mask and armed with a gun, he approached the teller's window. His intentions were clear as he demanded all the money, his eyes gleaming with a sinister determination. When the teller bravely resisted, seeking refuge behind a filing cabinet, Smith's attention turned to Larry Don Rojas, the company's district manager, a man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. Rojas, perhaps sensing the impending danger, complied with Smith's demands. Money exchanged hands, hastily stuffed into a plastic bag. But fate had a cruel twist in store. As Rojas tried to retreat, seeking a moment of respite from the harrowing ordeal, Smith's grip tightened. He ordered Rojas back to the window, where their lives intersected in a chilling exchange. Desperation filled the air as Rojas pleaded for mercy, desperately removing a bracelet from his wrist. And then, in an instant, the shots rang out, piercing the silence with a thunderous force. Rojas, struck by a bullet in the chest, crumpled to the ground, his life extinguished forever. Smith, consumed by his own dark desires, fled the scene, leaving chaos and shattered lives in his wake. But he couldn't outrun the relentless pursuit of justice. Two brave office workers chased him through fields and into an apartment complex, their hearts pounding with adrenaline. Smith, cornered and desperate, turned to violence once more, opening fire on those who dared to bring him to justice. In a twist of fate, he stumbled amid the chaos, falling to the unforgiving ground. The pursuing crowd, fueled by a mix of rage and justice, subdued him, while a vigilant detective swiftly handcuffed him. The trial that followed showed how committed the community is to seeking justice. Smith's fate was sealed, and the specter of death loomed over him. However, it was his peculiar request that drew the attention of the world. In the face of imminent execution, Smith longed for a lump of dirt. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice, refusing to grant his request, denied him this final act of defiance. Instead, he was offered a simple meal from the prison's regular menu. When the day arrived, his mother's attorneys, driven by desperation and a flicker of hope, beseeched the Supreme Court of the United States to spare his life, arguing his mental incompetence. The court, in an unexpected twist, accepted the appeal, granting a stay of execution. Nevertheless, the saga was far from over. 2 years later, the final act was set to unfold. Smith, rejecting any further appeals, stood defiant, yearning for release from the prison walls that had become his personal purgatory. His mother, undeterred by previous failures, launched another appeal, pleading for mercy, insisting on his mental incompetence. But the Supreme Court, this time unmoved by her pleas, denied the appeal, leaving Smith with no escape from his impending fate. June 26, 1990, marked the culmination of a dark chapter in Texas history. Smith, now a mere shell of a man, was led to the execution chamber at the infamous Huntsville unit. As the clock struck 12:31 a.m., the lethal injection flowed through Smith's veins, sealing his destiny. In his final moment, he proclaimed his innocence, his voice echoing with a somber defiance. And then, as if seeking solace in a higher power, he uttered the sacred Krishna blessing. But it was his last meal that lingered in the minds of those who bore witness to his demise. Denied his request for dirt, Smith settled for plain yogurt, a stark reminder of the limitations of his desires. A final act of defiance thwarted, leaving behind a lingering question. What darkness had consumed the soul of a man who sought solace in the taste of dirt? Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Wuornos was a serial killer who murdered at least 7 people between 1989 and 1990. She was sentenced to death and executed in 2002. Her last words were widely discussed due to their strange nature. She said, "I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all, I'll be back, I'll be back." Wuornos had a troubled childhood and turned to prostitution to make a living. She had several run-ins with the law, including charges for driving while intoxicated and firing a gun from a moving vehicle. In 1989, she disguised herself as a hitchhiking prostitute and killed 7 middle-aged men. She dumped their bodies along highways in Florida and southern Georgia. When arrested in 1991, She claimed self-defense, but was found guilty of the murder of Richard Mallory. She later confessed to killing 6 other men. Although the body of the 7th victim was never found, Wuornos was sentenced for the murders of the 6 men. Her case sparked discussions about gender and violence and gained political significance. Before her execution, Wuornos expressed hatred and a desire to kill again. She requested to be executed immediately, as she believed that not giving her a severe punishment would put the world at risk. She was executed on October 9, 2002, after spending a decade on death row. Her last meal was a cup of black coffee. Wuornos had a strong belief in Jesus Christ and thought she would be reunited with him through her execution. There is an episode about Aileen Wuornos titled Manhunter Aileen Wuornos on Netflix's series Catching Killers, which was released in 2021. Victor Fager. Victor Fager, a name that echoes through the halls of American history, is forever entwined with the controversial practice of the death penalty. Born in 1935, Fager's life was marred by a troubled existence, leading him down a path of darkness and despair. Eventually becoming a drifter, he found himself in Dubuque, Iowa in the summer of 1960, seeking a rented room in a boarding house. It was during this time that Fager's descent into criminality began to take shape. Driven by sinister motives, he embarked on a twisted quest, flipping through the yellow pages and dialing the numbers of physicians in the local area. His sinister intentions led him to Dr. Edward Bartell, and it was here that Fager's criminal activities would take a deadly turn. In a chilling act of violence, Fager kidnapped and ultimately murdered Dr. Bartell in Illinois. Cunningly luring the physician under pretenses, he extinguished a life that had dedicated itself to healing. Dr. Bartell's lifeless body was discovered in a desolate cornfield, a single gunshot wound to the head sealing his fate. Fager's reign of terror was brought to an end when he was apprehended in Birmingham, Alabama, while attempting to sell Dr. Bartell's car. Investigators believed that Fager's motive for the murder was rooted in his desire to gain access to any drugs the physician might have possessed for his patients. The fact that Fager had transported his hostage across state lines led to federal charges being filed against him. In a desperate attempt to evade justice, Fager weaved a web of lies, concocting a tale about a drug addict from Chicago whom he alleged had been the actual murderer. According to Fager's account, he had killed the supposed accomplice and disposed of the body in the Mississippi River. However, authorities found no evidence to support the existence of this mysterious figure. Fager's trial in federal court resulted in his conviction for his heinous crimes, and he was sentenced to death. He filed an appeal in a bid to escape the ultimate punishment, but his plea was denied. The power to commute his sentence lay solely in the hands of President John F. Kennedy. Iowa's Governor Harold Hughes, an opponent of capital punishment, joined forces with Fager's attorney to seek clemency, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. President Kennedy deemed the crime too heinous to warrant mercy, denying their request. Fager found himself incarcerated at the federal penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. But due to the facility's inability to carry out executions, he had to be returned to Iowa. On March 5, 1963, Fager was transferred to the Iowa State Penitentiary at Fort Madison, where he awaited his impending execution. During his 10 days on death row, Fager surprised prison guards with an intriguing request for his last meal. He asked for a single olive, with the pit still intact. When questioned, he explained that he hoped an olive tree would sprout from his grave, serving as a symbol of peace. It was a peculiar and deeply symbolic gesture that reflected the complex and unusual beliefs that accompanied Fager in his final moments. On March 15, 1963, the day of reckoning arrived. Fager, facing the noose, met his fate through the solemn act of hanging. Witnesses, including an Associated Press journalist and John Ely, a member of the Iowa House of Representatives, stood in attendance. Ely's presence at the execution left an indelible mark on his conscience, transforming him into a staunch opponent of the death penalty, eventually working towards its abolition in Iowa in 1965. In the aftermath of Fager's execution, a chilling discovery awaited the authorities. They found the olive pit hidden away in one of his suit pockets, a tangible reminder of the unusual request he made for his last meal. Victor Fager's execution marked the end of an era in Iowa, as it would be nearly 4 decades until the next federal execution took place in the United States. In 2001, the execution of Timothy McVeigh would once again thrust the death penalty into the national spotlight. However, Iowa had moved forward, abolishing capital punishment for all crimes in 1965, and steadfastly refusing to reinstate it. It stood as one of the 22 U.S. states that had fully abolished the death penalty, a significant step towards a more humane and compassionate justice system. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.